I was reviewing quarterly reports in my downtown Ashbrook office when my phone buzzed with a text that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my sister. Dahlia, I need you to cover the wedding costs. $45,000. Non-negotiable. Family. Comes first, and you're the only one who can afford it. Transfer by Friday or there won't be a wedding. My hands went cold as I read Sylwen's message 3 times, each word hitting like a slap. $45,000. Just like that. No please, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made to build my financial consulting firm from nothing while she lived her dream life funded by everyone else. But what I discovered 2 weeks later, when wedding planner Rowena Thalric called me in tears saying Sylwen's own credit card had been declined for a $200 flower deposit, would reveal a web of lies and financial manipulation that went deeper than I ever imagined. This is the story of how my sister's wedding demand exposed the truth about our family, and how I finally learned to choose my financial future over their endless expectations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was sitting in my financial consulting office in downtown Millhaven, the late afternoon sun streaming through my corner windows as I reviewed the quarterly earnings report that would determine whether I could finally afford that dream vacation to Europe I'd been planning for 3 years. The numbers looked good. Really good. Better than I dared to hope when I first started this business with nothing but a second-hand desk and a prayer. I was actually smiling when my phone lit up with an incoming text. The sender was Sylwen, my older sister, and I expected maybe a casual check-in or a funny meme. What I got instead was a message that felt like a physical blow to my chest. Dahlia, I need you to cover the wedding costs. $45,000, non-negotiable. Family comes first, and you're the only one who can afford it. Transfer by Friday or there won't be a wedding. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I dropped my phone like it had suddenly become scalding hot. The device clattered against my mahogany desk, the screen still glowing with those impossible words. $45,000. Just like that. No explanation, no pleas, no acknowledgement of what she was actually asking. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands began to shake as I picked up the phone to read the message again, hoping somehow I'd misunderstood. But there it was, in black and white text. My sister was demanding nearly $50,000 from me like I was some sort of personal ATM she could just make withdrawals from whenever she needed cash. The casualness of it made my stomach turn. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. As if I was the one being difficult by not immediately handing over enough money to buy a luxury car. I sank back in my executive chair, the leather squeaking, under my weight as my mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just about money. This was about everything. About the years I'd spent clawing my way up from poverty while she lived her carefree life. About the sacrifices I'd made, the relationships I'd lost, the nights I'd worked until dawn building something from nothing while she partied and posted Instagram photos of her perfect life funded by everyone else. The worst part wasn't even the amount. It was the assumption. The complete, arrogant assumption that I would just say yes. That my money, my hard-earned success, was somehow communal property she could claim whenever she needed it. There was no question in her text, no request for help, just a demand, delivered with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. I stared at my reflection in the darkening window, seeing a woman I barely recognized. When had I become the family bank? When had my success become everyone else's emergency fund? The questions burned in my chest as I thought about all the times I'd already helped her. The rent payments when she was between jobs, the car repairs when her boyfriend's motorcycle broke down, the credit card bills she'd begged me to cover with promises to pay me back that never materialized. But this was different. This was massive. This was my entire emergency fund, my vacation money, my down payment savings, and more. This was asking me to financially cripple myself so she could have her dream wedding to Leander Corvin, a guy she'd been dating for barely 2 years and who worked part-time at a coffee shop while pursuing his passion project of writing a novel. That would never be finished. My phone buzzed again and my stomach dropped, thinking it was another message from Sylwen. Instead, it was my assistant reminding me about tomorrow's client meetings. Normal life continuing while my world tilted off its axis. I tried to focus on the work in front of me, but the numbers on the screen blurred together as tears of frustration stung my eyes. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about family supporting family. This was about power and control and the sick dynamic that had been brewing in our family for years. The dynamic where Sylwen got to be the golden daughter who could do no wrong, and I got to be the responsible one who cleaned up everyone's messes and funded everyone's dreams. I thought about calling her immediately, demanding an explanation, asking her how she could possibly think this was okay. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of every other time I'd tried to stand up to her, only to be painted as the selfish sister who cared more about money than family. Maybe it was the exhaustion of fighting a battle I'd been losing for decades. Instead, I just sat there in my expensive office chair, surrounded by the evidence of my success, and felt more alone than I had in years. Because success means nothing when the people you love only see dollar signs when they look at you. Success means nothing when your own sister treats you like a business opportunity instead of a human being. The sun finished setting outside my window and the automatic lights in my office flickered on, casting everything in harsh fluorescent brightness that made the whole situation feel even more surreal. I picked up my phone again and scrolled back through our previous conversations. Casual chatter about weekend plans, complaints about work, photos of her engagement ring. Nothing that suggested she was planning to blindside me with a financial demand that would change everything between us. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she'd been planning this moment, waiting for the right time to strike when she knew I couldn't say no. When she knew the family pressure would be too intense, the guilt too overwhelming, the social consequences of refusing too severe. I thought about my parents, Celia and Matthew DeMar, and what their reaction would be when they found out I'd refused to fund their precious daughter's wedding. I could already hear my mother's voice, dripping with disappointment. "Dahlia, she's your only sister. How could you be so selfish?" I could see my father's face, that look of quiet disapproval that had haunted my nightmares since I was a girl, trying desperately to earn his approval. The office felt suffocating suddenly, the walls closing in as the weight of the decision pressed down on me. $45,000. The number echoed in my head like a death knell, representing not just money but years of my life, months of sacrifice, countless nights of choosing work over relationships and security over happiness. I closed my laptop with more force than necessary, the sharp sound echoing in the empty office building. Everyone else had gone home hours ago to their families, their normal problems, their manageable dramas. They weren't dealing with sisters who thought love could be measured in bank transfers and family loyalty could be purchased with financial ruin. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I caught sight of the framed photo on my desk. It was from Sylwen's engagement party 6 months ago, both of us smiling at the camera with our arms around each other. She was glowing with happiness, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light as she held up her hand for everyone to admire. I remembered that night, how proud I'd been of her for finding someone who made her happy, how excited I'd been to help plan her perfect day. Now that photo felt like evidence of my own stupidity. How naive I'd been to think her happiness was about love instead of luxury. How foolish to believe that her excitement was about marriage instead of the elaborate party she could throw with other people's money. I turned the photo face down and walked out of my office, locking the door behind me with hands that still trembled slightly. Tomorrow, I would have to make a decision that would change everything. Tonight, I just needed to go home and figure out how the girl who used to share secrets and steal cookies with me had become someone I barely recognized. Someone who could demand my financial destruction with all the emotion of ordering coffee. The drive home to my apartment in Westbridge took 45 minutes through evening traffic, giving me plenty of time to think about how drastically different my life had become from those early days when Sylwen and I shared everything, including dreams that seemed impossible from where we started. We grew up in Thornwick, a small industrial town where most people worked at the textile factory or the truck stop diner, and dreams of anything bigger were considered unrealistic at best, delusional at worst. Our parents, Celia and Matthew DeMar, weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. Dad worked double shifts at the packaging plant, while Mom took in sewing work from neighbors to make ends meet. We lived in a cramped rental house with thin walls and a leaky roof, where every dollar was accounted for, and luxury meant getting name-brand cereal instead of the generic stuff. But despite the financial struggles, there was love in that house, or at least I thought there was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at our kitchen table that wobbled on uneven legs, announcing to my parents that I was going to be rich someday. Not just comfortable, not just getting by, but actually wealthy. I wanted to buy my parents a house where the roof didn't leak and the heat worked properly. I wanted to take family vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. I wanted to never have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. My father laughed, not unkindly, and ruffled my hair. "That's a nice dream, sweetheart. But life doesn't work that way for people like us. We work hard, we get by, and we find happiness in simple things. Money doesn't grow on trees, and it sure doesn't fall into the laps of little girls from Thornwick." But I was determined. While other kids my age were playing video games or watching cartoons, I was reading library books about business and entrepreneurship. I started my first company at age 10, going door to door offering to organize people's closets and basement storage areas for $5. Most neighbors thought it was cute, but I was serious. I saved every penny in a mason jar hidden under my bed, dreaming of the day when I'd have enough money to change everything. Sylwen, on the other hand, was content to be the pretty, charming daughter who everyone adored. 3 years older than me, she had natural charisma that made people want to take care of her. Teachers gave her extra chances on assignments. Neighbors hired her for easy jobs like watering plants while they were on vacation. And our parents seemed to melt whenever she flashed that perfect smile. She didn't need to work as hard as I did, because everything came naturally to her, including other people's generosity. While I spent my teenage years working at the local grocery store after school, saving every dollar for college, Sylwen was chosen for homecoming court, dated the captain of the football team, and somehow always had money for new clothes and makeup despite not having a job. When I asked where the money came from, she'd just shrug and say people like to help her out. It never occurred to me then that people usually meant our parents, who somehow found extra money for her wants while my needs were met with lectures about the value of hard work. College was where the real difference between us became obvious. I had earned a partial scholarship through academic achievement and worked 3 jobs to cover the rest, living on ramen noodles and coffee while studying business administration at Millhaven University. I slept 4 hours a night, attended every class, and graduated summa cum laude with a 3.97 GPA and exhaustion so deep I could barely celebrate at my own graduation ceremony. Sylwen started college the same year I did, but at a more expensive, private school that our parents somehow managed to afford by taking out loans and refinancing the house. She majored in art history, a beautiful subject that would never pay the bills, and spent her college years going to parties, joining sororities, and taking spring break trips to Cancun that showed up on her Instagram feed with alarming frequency. When I asked how she afforded these luxuries on her part-time campus bookstore salary, she'd laugh and say she was really good at budgeting. After graduation, I moved to the city with $2,000 to my name, a business suit from Goodwill, and a dream of starting my own financial consulting firm. I rented a studio apartment in the worst part of town, where sirens wailed every night, and my neighbors included drug dealers and people who screamed at each other through paper-thin walls. But it was what I could afford, and I was determined to make it work. Those first 2 years were brutal in ways I still have nightmares about. I worked as a junior analyst at a large firm during the day, making barely enough to cover rent and student loan payments, while building my client base at night and on weekends. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more nights than I care to remember, wore the same 3 professional outfits in rotation until they were threadbare, and spent my evenings cold-calling potential clients who usually hung up on me within 30 seconds. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if my father had been right about people like us not being meant for bigger things. There were mornings I woke up with stress-induced headaches so severe I could barely see straight. I missed birthdays, holidays, and social events because I was either working or too exhausted to pretend to be human around other people. Meanwhile, Sylwen moved back home after college and took a part-time job at an art gallery in the next town over. She lived rent-free in our parents' house, drove Mom's car, and used her gallery employee discount to build an impressive wardrobe that she showed off on social media. When I visited home during those rare weekends when I could afford the gas, money, I'd find her sleeping until noon, then spending her afternoons shopping or meeting friends for expensive coffee drinks that cost more than I spent on food in a day. "You work too hard," she'd tell me with genuine concern in her voice. "Life is meant to be enjoyed, not endured. You should take more time for yourself." It was easy advice to give when someone else was paying your bills, but I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I smiled and nodded and went back to my tiny apartment to work 16-hour days because that was the only way forward I could see. The breakthrough came during my 3rd year of grinding. I landed a major client, a small tech company that needed help restructuring their finances before going public. The project took 6 months of my life, 6 months of 18-hour days and stress-induced insomnia. But the success fee they paid me was enough to move to a decent apartment and finally buy clothes that fit properly. That success led to more clients, which led to more success fees, which led to me finally being able to incorporate my own firm and rent actual office space instead of working from coffee shops with unreliable Wi-Fi. By my 5th year in the city, I was making 6 figures and had a waiting list of clients who wanted my services. I thought success would feel different. I thought it would feel like vindication, like proof that I'd been right to sacrifice everything for this dream. Instead, it felt lonely. The people who should have been celebrating with me were either too busy with their own lives to care or too resentful of my success to acknowledge it. When I called home to tell my parents I'd been featured in a business magazine as one of the city's rising stars under 30, my mother's response was lukewarm congratulations, followed immediately by concern that I was working too much and neglecting my personal life. When I sent the article to Sylwen, she responded with a thumbs-up emoji and then immediately changed the subject to her latest dating drama. But the success kept growing. I bought my first luxury apartment, a 2-bedroom corner unit with floor-to-ceiling, windows and a view of the downtown skyline that still took my breath away every morning. I hired employees, people who looked at me with the same respect I'd once reserved for the executives I'd admired from afar. I finally took that European vacation, though I went alone because I'd lost touch with most of my friends during the years of non-stop work. The irony wasn't lost on me that my success had isolated me from the very people I'd initially wanted to help. I'd dreamed of being wealthy enough to take care of my family, to give them the security and comfort they'd never had. Instead, my wealth had become a source of tension, expectation, and resentment that colored every interaction. Sylwen still lived at home, still worked part-time, still somehow managed to afford a lifestyle that should have been impossible on her salary. But she was happy, or at least she seemed happy in all her social media posts. She had friends, a social life, a boyfriend who adored her, and no stress about money because she'd never had to worry about it. Other people had always taken care of that for her, And now, apparently, it was my turn to be one of those other people. The realization hit me as I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage, the request for $45,000 suddenly making perfect sense in the context of our lifelong dynamic. I had always been the worker, the planner, the responsible one. She had always been the dreamer, the charmer, the one who expected others to make her dreams come true. The only difference now was that I had enough money to make those expectations feel reasonable, at least to everyone who wasn't being asked to write the check. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my king-sized bed in my luxury apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the times I'd been here before, though never for this much money. The pattern had been there all along, hiding in plain sight like a toxic thread, woven through the fabric of our family dynamic, and I'd been too close to see it clearly until now. I grabbed my laptop and started going through my bank statements, credit card records, and even old emails, documenting every time I'd been asked to help Sylwen financially over the past decade. What I found made my stomach turn with a mixture of rage and recognition. The numbers were staggering and the pattern was unmistakable. It started small when I was still struggling myself. $300 here, $500 there. Emergency car repairs, sudden medical bills, rent shortfalls that happened with suspicious frequency. Each time, Sylwen would call crying, explaining how dire the situation was, how she had nowhere else to turn, how I was the only one who could save her. And each time, I'd transferred the money without question, because that's what sisters did for each other. But as my income grew, so did the requests. $1,000 for a security deposit. When she finally moved out of our parents' house, $2,000 for dental work that somehow wasn't covered by the insurance plan she claimed to have. $3,000 to pay off credit card debt she'd accumulated by accident. The amount scaled perfectly with my ability to pay them, as if she had access to my financial statements and calibrated her emergencies accordingly. The most infuriating part wasn't even the money itself. It was the way each request was presented as a one-time crisis, a unique situation that would never happen again. "I know I've asked before, but this is different," became her standard opening line. "Once I get through this, I'll never have to ask again." Except she always did ask again, and the amounts kept getting larger, and my resentment kept growing even as I continued to say yes. I scrolled through 3 years of text messages between us, and the manipulation was so obvious I wondered how I'd missed it for so long. Every request followed the same psychological playbook: crisis, urgency, family obligation, emotional manipulation, and finally gratitude that made me feel good about being used. "Dahlia, I'm literally about to get evicted. I need $1,800 by tomorrow, or I'll be homeless. I can't believe I'm even asking, but you're the only person I trust enough to help me. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I get my tax refund." I'm crying as I type this, but the vet says Whiskers needs emergency surgery and I don't have the $2,400. I know you love him too, and I can't let him die because I'm broke. You're such a good sister for even reading this. I don't deserve you. I'm so embarrassed to ask, but my car got repossessed and I need $200 to get it back or I'll lose my job. I've already borrowed from everyone else I can think of. You're literally my last hope. I'll work overtime to pay you back, I swear. Each message was crafted to trigger maximum guilt and urgency while minimizing the time I had to think rationally about the request. Each one positioned her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control and me as the hero who could save the day. Each one ended with promises of repayment that never materialized and gratitude that was supposed to be payment enough. But what made my blood boil as I scrolled through this catalog of manipulation was seeing the Instagram posts that appeared between these desperate pleas for money. Photos of expensive dinners, weekend trips, new clothes, concert tickets, spa days. She was living a lifestyle that her part-time gallery job could never support, funding it through a combination of family money, boyfriend money, and emergency loans from me that were never actually emergencies. The car repossession story was particularly galling when I cross-referenced it with her social media activity. The same week she claimed to desperately need $3,200 to get her car back, she'd posted photos from a weekend ski trip in Aspen with Leander. The lift tickets alone would have cost more than $200, never mind the hotel, meals, and equipment rental. But somehow, she'd had money for a luxury vacation while being unable to make her car payment. I started taking screenshots, building a case file of evidence that would have made any prosecutor proud. The timeline of her emergencies versus her actual lifestyle painted a clear picture of someone who had weaponized my success against my compassion. She wasn't asking for help during genuine crises. She was asking for subsidies to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford while refusing to make the difficult choices that would actually solve her financial problems. The worst part was realizing that our parents were completely complicit in this system. Every time I'd mentioned being frustrated with Sylwen's constant financial requests, my mother would rush to her defense with variations of the same speech. "She's going through a rough patch. You know how hard it is for creative people to make steady money. You're so blessed to be successful. Sharing with family is what makes it meaningful. She looks up to you so much, and helping her is just another way you're changing the world." My father's approach was more subtle, but equally effective. He'd never directly ask me to give Sylwen money, but he'd make comments about family loyalty and how proud he was that his daughters took care of each other. He'd tell stories about how his own brothers had helped each other through hard times, and how that's what distinguished families who thrived from families who just survived. The manipulation was multi-generational and systematic. They'd created a family mythology where my success was a family asset rather than a personal achievement, and Sylwen's constant financial crises were opportunities for me to prove my love rather than red flags about her life choices. I thought about all the times I'd tried to have honest conversations with Sylwen about budgeting, about making a real plan to pay me back, about maybe adjusting her lifestyle to match her income. Every time she'd become defensive and emotional, accusing me of caring more about money than about her well-being. She'd cry and apologize and promise to do better, then continue living exactly the same way while I felt guilty for bringing up something as crass as financial responsibility. "You don't understand what it's like," was her favorite deflection. "Not everyone can be a business genius like you. Some of us have to struggle with normal jobs and normal problems. I can't help it that I'm not as naturally gifted with money as you are." She'd turned my financial success into a weapon against my right to have boundaries. Because I was good with money, I was obligated to be good with hers too. Because I'd been lucky enough to build a profitable business, I was selfish for not sharing that luck freely with family members who'd chosen different paths. But the most insidious part of the pattern was how she'd gradually trained me to associate my worth in the family with my willingness to pay. When I gave her money, I was the generous sister, the family success story, the proof that the DeMar family could rise above their circumstances. When I hesitated or asked questions, I was the selfish one, the sister who'd forgotten her roots, the person who valued money more than relationships. She'd gamified my guilt, turning every financial request into a test of my character and my love. And I'd been failing that test for years by continuing to pay instead of recognizing what it really was. Extortion dressed up as family loyalty. The $45,000 wedding demand wasn't an escalation of this pattern. It was the logical conclusion. She'd spent a decade training me to believe that saying no to her financial requests meant saying no to family itself. She'd conditioned me to associate her happiness with my generosity and her problems with my obligation to solve them. As I closed my laptop at 3 a.m, surrounded by the evidence of my own exploitation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. Not the angry, reactive clarity that comes from being hurt, but the cold, analytical clarity that comes from finally seeing the truth about a situation you've been too close to understand. Sylwen hadn't asked for $45,000 because she was desperate. She'd asked because she genuinely believed I owed it to her. She'd asked because in her mind, my money was family money, and her wedding was a family event, and refusing to pay would make me a bad sister rather than a reasonable human being with boundaries. But what she hadn't counted on was me finally adding up all those smaller betrayals into one massive realization. I hadn't been supporting my sister through hard times. I'd been enabling a lifestyle of financial irresponsibility while teaching her that manipulation was more effective than budgeting, and guilt trips were more reliable than employment. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't guilt, or obligation, or the exhausting weight of being everyone's solution. I felt angry. Not explosive, emotional anger, but the cold, sustained anger that comes from realizing you've been playing a rigged game for so long you forgot it was possible to stop playing. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to continue, being the family ATM, or finally become the woman who'd learned to say no. Tonight, I just needed to feel the full weight of how much this pattern had cost me, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The $45,000 wasn't really about the wedding. It was about whether I was finally ready to stop paying for love that was supposed to be free. Free. I didn't call Sylwen back immediately. Instead, I spent 2 more days letting the reality of her demand settle into my bones, feeling the weight of the decision and the lifetime of manipulation that had led to this moment. But by Thursday morning, with her arbitrary Friday deadline looming, I knew I couldn't put off the conversation any longer. I also knew this couldn't happen over text messages or phone calls where she could hang up or manipulate the narrative. This needed to be face-to-face. I drove the 2 hours back to Thornwick on Thursday evening, telling my assistant to clear my Friday morning schedule without explaining why. The familiar route took me past the textile factory where my father still worked overtime shifts, past the high school where Sylwen had been homecoming queen while I was in the library studying for AP exams, past all the landmarks of a childhood that had shaped us into such different people. I pulled into the driveway of our family home just after 7 p.m., knowing that everyone would be gathered for dinner like they were every Thursday night. It was a tradition that had continued even after Sylwen and I had grown up, one of those family rituals that was supposed to prove how close we all were despite the obvious dysfunction that simmered beneath every interaction. The house looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down, though I knew my parents were doing their best to maintain it on their limited income. Dad's truck was in the driveway next to Mom's aging sedan, and I could see warm light glowing through the kitchen window where I knew they'd all be gathered around the same wobbly table where I'd first announced my dreams of financial success. 20 years ago. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering the courage for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Then I grabbed my purse, walked to the front door, and let myself in with the key I'd never bothered to return. "Dahlia!" My mother's voice carried from the kitchen, bright with surprise. "What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you." I walked into the kitchen to find the scene I'd anticipated. Mom at the stove, Dad reading the paper at the table, and Sylwen scrolling through her phone while picking at a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Leander was there too, looking uncomfortable in his artfully distressed jeans and vintage band t-shirt, clearly still trying to figure out how to fit into our blue-collar family dynamic. "Hey, everyone," I said, accepting Mom's hug while meeting Sylwen's eyes over her shoulder. My sister's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew why I was here. "Sit down, honey. I'll make you a plate," Mom fussed, already reaching for the cabinet. "You look thin. Are you eating enough? You work too hard." "I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I need to talk to Sylwen about something important. Could we have some privacy?" The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Dad looked up from his newspaper, and Leander shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But it was Sylwen's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. Instead of looking curious or concerned, she looked defensive, her jaw setting in that stubborn line I remembered from childhood arguments. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of family," she said, her voice carrying a warning that I ignored. "Okay then." I pulled out my phone and opened her text message, reading it aloud in the same casual tone she'd used to type it. Dahlia, I need you to cover the wedding costs. $45,000. Non-negotiable. Family comes first, and you're the only one who can afford it. Transfer by Friday or there won't be a wedding. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Dad folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, and Leander looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor, but Sylwen just lifted her chin defiantly. I don't see what the problem is, she said. You have the money, I need the money, and it's for something important. Family weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events. The problem, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest, is that you're demanding I pay for your entire wedding like I'm some kind of personal bank account. The problem is that you think my success is your trust fund. That's not what this is about, Mom interjected quickly. Sylwen, honey, you didn't tell us you were asking Dahlia for money. Because I knew you'd make it weird, Sylwen snapped, just like she's making it weird. God, Dahlia, it's not like I'm asking you to buy me a yacht. It's my wedding, the most important day of my life, and you're acting like I asked you to set money on fire. $45,000, I repeated slowly. Let me put that in perspective for everyone. That's more than Dad makes in an entire year. That's enough to buy 2 brand new cars. That's my entire emergency fund plus my vacation savings plus money I'd have to borrow. And you're treating it like I should be happy to hand it over without question. You make 10 times what Dad makes, Sylwen shot back. Don't pretend like this would ruin you. You spend more than that on your apartment every year. How do you know what I spend on my apartment? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, but her casual familiarity with my finances was disturbing. She flushed slightly, but didn't back down. I know you do well for yourself. I know you can afford this. And I know that if you really loved me, you wouldn't make me beg. If I really loved you, I'd pay for your wedding? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sylwen, do you hear yourself? You're literally saying that my love for you can only be proven through bank transfers. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. And it's exactly what you've been saying for years. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through our message history. Let's see. In the past 3 years alone, I've given you money for car repairs, medical bills, rent deposits, credit card debt, emergency vet bills, and at least 6 other crises that somehow always happened right when you wanted to do something expensive. Those were real emergencies. Were they? I found the screenshots I'd taken and started showing them to the room. Because this is a photo you posted from Aspen the same week you claimed you were about to be evicted and needed $1,800 for rent. And this is a picture of the new designer purse you bought the day after I paid your emergency credit card bill. The room was dead silent now. Even Leander was staring at Sylwen with an expression I couldn't quite read. But it was my parents' faces that broke my heart. The gradual realization, the disappointment, the recognition of a pattern they'd been willfully blind to for years. Those are taken out of context, Sylwen said weakly. Are they? Then explain the context. Explain how you can afford ski trips but not rent. Explain how you can buy luxury handbags but can't pay your credit card bill. Explain how you can plan a $45,000 wedding but can't cover it yourself. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Do you want to know? What's really sad about all of this? I would have helped you plan a beautiful wedding within your budget. I would have been happy to contribute what I could afford without destroying my own financial security. But you didn't want help planning a wedding you could afford. You wanted me to pay for a wedding you couldn't afford. There's a difference. It's not about the money, she said, but her voice had lost its defiant edge. It's absolutely about the money. It's about the fact that you think my financial success makes me obligated to fund your lifestyle choices. It's about the fact that you've spent years manipulating my guilt and my love for you into a personal ATM. It's about the fact that you just threatened to cancel your wedding if I don't pay for it. Like my refusal to bankrupt myself is somehow ruining your relationship. Dad finally spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. Sylwen, is this true? Have you been asking your sister for money regularly? I don't see why that's anyone's business but ours, she said, but the fight was going out of her voice. It becomes everyone's business when you're asking for enough money to buy a house, he said. And it becomes everyone's business when you're threatening family relationships over it. I looked at my father with gratitude. For the first time in years, he was seeing the situation clearly instead of through the lens of favoritism that had colored so many of our family interactions. I'm not threatening anything, Sylwen said. I'm just saying that if my own sister won't help me have the wedding I've always dreamed of, then maybe she doesn't care about my happiness as much as I thought. There it is, I said quietly. The manipulation, the guilt trip, the implication that saying no to financial demands means I don't love you. Do you even hear yourself, Sylwen? You're holding our relationship hostage for money. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You know what? Forget it. Forget I asked. I should have known better than to expect help from someone who cares more about her bank account than her family. I care about my family, I said, standing up as well. That's why I've been enabling your financial irresponsibility for years. That's why I've been paying for your mistakes instead of letting you learn from them. But I'm done. I'm done being manipulated with guilt. I'm done being treated like a trust fund instead of a sister. And I'm definitely done being threatened with loss of family love if I don't pay up. I looked around the room at my parents who were staring at their plates, and at Leander, who looked mortified. Then I looked back at Sylwen, who was crying now, but in a way that felt calculated rather than genuine. I love you, I said. I always have, but I won't be extorted by that love anymore. Plan a wedding you can afford, or don't get married yet. Those are your options. Getting married isn't a right that other people are obligated to fund. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me at the kitchen doorway. Fine, she said, her voice thick with tears that might have been real. But don't expect me to forget this. Don't expect me to pretend everything is normal between us after you chose money over family. I turned back to look at her one last time. I'm not choosing money over family, Sylwen. I'm choosing self-respect over manipulation. There's a difference. And with that, I walked out of the kitchen, out of the house and back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the tears streaming down my face. The drive back to Millhaven was a blur of tears, adrenaline, and a strange sense of liberation that I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my adult life, I'd said no to Sylwen's financial demands without apologizing, without wavering, and without promising to reconsider. The confrontation had been brutal, but it had also been necessary, and as the miles passed, between me and my childhood home, I felt something shifting inside me that went deeper than just this one conversation. But I also knew that confrontation was only the first step. If I'd learned anything about my family's manipulation tactics over the years, it was that they never accepted no as a final answer. There would be follow-up calls, guilt trips from my parents, flying monkeys in the form of aunts and cousins, who'd been fed a carefully edited version of events, and escalating pressure designed to wear down my resolve until I caved and paid up like I always had before. This time was going to be different. This time I was going to be strategic instead of reactive, prepared instead of caught off guard, and most importantly, protected instead of vulnerable. I drove straight to my office instead of going home, spending the evening researching and planning, my response like I was preparing for the most important business negotiation of my career. Because in many ways, that's exactly what this was. A negotiation over the terms of our relationship, with my financial security and emotional well-being as the stakes. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Jorven Stradal, even though it was past 9 p.m. He was a friend from college who'd built his practice around protecting entrepreneurs from both business and personal liability, and he'd helped me structure my company in ways that insulated my assets from potential lawsuits, or other financial risks. Now I needed his help with a different kind of protection. Dahlia, he answered on the second ring, sounding concerned. What's going on? You don't usually call this late unless something serious has happened. I gave him the entire story, from the wedding demand to the confrontation, holding nothing back about the years of manipulation and financial exploitation that had led to this moment. He listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. And when I finished, his first response was both professional and personal. First of all, I'm proud of you for finally setting boundaries. I've watched you struggle with family financial issues for years, and it was clear the situation was unsustainable. Second, let's talk about protecting you from the fallout. Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive plan that would insulate me from further manipulation while documenting everything that had happened. He helped me draft a formal letter to Sylwen and my parents that would establish clear boundaries around financial requests, create a paper trail of the wedding demand and my refusal, and make it clear that any future attempts at financial coercion would be considered harassment. But more importantly, he helped me restructure my personal financial accounts in ways that would make it impossible for anyone to access them without my explicit consent. We updated my banking passwords, added additional security measures to all my investment accounts, and created a separate emergency fund that only I knew about, stored in an account that wasn't connected to any of my regular banking relationships. I've seen family financial manipulation destroy people, he told me as we worked through the details. The emotional abuse is often worse than the financial damage because it's so much harder to recognize and defend against. You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself now, before this escalates further. We also discussed the possibility of my family attempting to access my credit or financial information through identity theft or other means. It seemed paranoid at first, but as Yorvin pointed out, people who feel entitled to your money often feel entitled to information about your money as well. We placed fraud alerts on my credit reports, set up monitoring services, and created additional password protections on all my financial accounts. By the time I left my office at midnight, I had a plan that covered every angle I could think of, from the immediate aftermath of my refusal to long-term protection against future financial manipulation. I felt prepared for whatever was coming next, and that sense of preparation was almost as empowering as the confrontation itself had been. The Kai. Next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from various family members. The campaign had begun exactly as I'd predicted, with my mother leading the charge and various relatives joining in with their own versions of the same message. Family comes first. Money isn't everything. Sylwen is heartbroken. I'm being unreasonable. Can't we all just get along? Instead of responding to each message individually, which would have consumed my entire day and given them exactly the kind of emotional reaction they were hoping for, I sent one carefully crafted group message to all of them. I understand that everyone has opinions about my conversation with Sylwen yesterday. I want to be clear that this isn't about the money itself, but about the pattern of financial manipulation that has been going on for years. I love my family, but I will no longer be responding to demands for money, whether they're presented as emergencies, guilt trips, or ultimatums. Anyone who wants to have a relationship with me moving forward will need to respect this boundary. I'm not interested in arguing about this decision or justifying it further. The response was immediate and predictable. More calls, more messages, more attempts to draw me into emotional arguments about family loyalty and shared responsibility. But I held firm, referring all questions back to my original message and refusing to engage in the drama they were trying to create. The most difficult call came from my father, who sounded genuinely hurt and confused when he reached me at work that afternoon. Dahlia, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your mother and I never knew Sylwen was asking you for money so regularly. We certainly never asked you to pay for her wedding, but now she's saying she might have to cancel the whole thing, and Leander's family is asking questions and everyone's upset. Can't we find some middle ground here? It was the hardest conversation of the entire ordeal because I could hear the genuine pain in his voice. He wasn't manipulating me. He was genuinely caught in the middle of a situation he didn't fully understand. But I also knew that finding middle ground with someone like Sylwen meant I'd end up paying for half the wedding instead of all of it, and the manipulation would continue. "Dad," I said gently, "I know you and Mom didn't orchestrate this, but you did enable it by making me feel guilty every time I expressed frustration with Sylwen's financial requests. And middle ground isn't possible when someone is demanding money with threats. Either I pay for her wedding or I don't. There's no compromise position that doesn't reward her manipulation." He was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice was sadder but more understanding. "I suppose you're right. I just hate seeing the family torn apart like this." "The family isn't torn apart because I set boundaries," I told him. "It's torn apart because those boundaries were necessary in the first place." After that conversation, I felt both heartbroken and resolved. Heartbroken because I could hear how much pain this was causing people I loved, but resolved because I knew that continuing to enable the dysfunction would only make it worse in the long run. The final piece of my strategic response was the hardest one: cutting off the information flow that had allowed my family to calibrate their financial requests to my ability to pay. I realized that my regular updates about work successes, new clients, and business growth had been inadvertently providing them with a roadmap for how much they could ask for and when. Made the difficult decision to stop sharing details about my financial life with anyone in my family. No more mentions of new contracts, salary increases, or business expansions. No more photos of vacations, expensive purchases, or lifestyle upgrades that could be interpreted as evidence of my disposable income. I would still be present for family events and maintain relationships, but my financial life would be private information that couldn't be weaponized against my boundaries. It felt lonely, creating that separation between my success and my family relationships. I'd always wanted to share my achievements with the people I loved, to have them be proud of what I'd built and accomplished. But I was beginning to understand that sharing my successes with people who saw them as opportunities rather than achievements was a form of self-sabotage. By the end of the week, the constant barrage of messages and calls had slowed to a trickle. Either my family was beginning to understand that I was serious about my boundaries, or they were regrouping for a different kind of attack. Either way, I felt protected by the systems I'd put in place and the clarity I'd gained about what I was and wasn't willing to tolerate. The wedding demand had forced me to confront not just this one financial manipulation, but the entire dynamic that had made it possible. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own money, my own boundaries, and my own relationships. Whether Sylwen went through with the wedding or not was no longer my problem to solve. My only problem was maintaining the boundaries I'd set and protecting the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. The weekend after I'd set my financial boundaries brought exactly the kind of family drama I'd expected, but amplified to levels that surprised even me. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly the situation would spiral into a full-scale social media campaign designed to paint me as the villain in Sylwen's tragic love story. It started Saturday morning with a Facebook post from Sylwen that was clearly designed to generate maximum sympathy while making me look like a heartless monster. She'd crafted it with the skill of someone who understood exactly how to manipulate public opinion, and I had to admit it was devastatingly effective. "Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most," she wrote, accompanied by a photo of her and Leander looking devastated in their car. When family turns their back on love, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty and support. I never imagined I'd have to choose between having the wedding of my dreams and having a relationship with my sister. But apparently some people think money is more important than family happiness. Heartbroken doesn't even begin to cover it. The post had over 200 likes and 50 comments within an hour, all from friends, extended family members, and acquaintances who had no idea what the real situation was, but were more than happy to pile on with their outrage on her behalf. The comments ranged from general supportive statements to increasingly specific attacks on my character. "Family should always come first. So sorry you're going through this." "Some people forget where they came from when they get successful. You deserve so much better. I can't believe anyone would put money before their sister's wedding day. That's just heartless. Rich people always think they're better than everyone else. She probably spends more on shoes than your whole wedding would cost." What made it particularly infuriating was how carefully Sylwen had crafted the narrative to make it sound like I'd refused to help with her wedding at all, rather than refusing to pay for the entire $45,000 event. She'd turned my boundary setting into abandonment, and my refusal to be financially exploited into selfishness. But the real gut punch came when I saw that my own mother had liked the post and added her own comment. "Praying for healing in our family. Love should always win over pride." I stared at that comment for a full 5 minutes, feeling a betrayal so deep it was almost physical. My mother had publicly sided with Sylwen's version of events without even asking for my perspective, turning my refusal to be financially manipulated into a character flaw that needed divine intervention to fix. The social media campaign continued throughout the weekend, with various family members and family friends posting their own versions of the same theme: money versus family, love versus greed, the wealthy sister who'd forgotten her roots. Each post was carefully worded to avoid naming me directly while making it obvious who they were talking about, and each one attracted its own chorus of supportive comments from people who felt qualified to judge my character based on a deliberately incomplete story. My cousin Talira posted a lengthy status about how some people let success go to their heads and forget that family is forever while money is temporary. My aunt shared a meme about blood being thicker than water, with crying laughing emojis and a comment about how some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Even family friends who barely knew me were chiming in with their opinions about the importance of supporting family during major life events. I wanted to respond, to tell my side of the story, to explain the years of financial manipulation and the impossible demands that had led to this moment. But I knew that engaging would only escalate the drama and give them exactly what they wanted: evidence that they'd gotten under my skin. Instead, I stayed silent and let them exhaust themselves with their righteous indignation. The breaking point came Monday afternoon when my phone rang with a call from an unknown local number. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it was another family member calling to lecture me about my obligations, but something made me pick up. "Is this Dahlia Quenrick?" The voice was professional, female, and stressed. "Yes, this is Dahlia. This is Rowena Thalric from Enchanted Events Wedding Planning. I'm calling because I have Sylwen Oristal as a client, and she listed you as her emergency contact for financial matters. We've had some issues with payment processing, and I was hoping you could help us resolve them." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not responsible for Sylwen's wedding payments, and I certainly didn't agree to be an emergency contact for financial matters." There was a pause, and when Rowena spoke again, she sounded even more stressed. "Oh dear, this is awkward. She told us that you were covering all the wedding expenses and that if there were any payment issues, we should contact you directly to resolve them. She said you were handling everything because you wanted to surprise her." The manipulation was so breathtaking that I actually had to sit down. "When did she tell you this?" "About 3 months ago when she first hired us. She said you were insisting on paying for everything as a wedding gift, but that you wanted it to be a surprise, so we should process payments through her cards first, and then contact you if anything was declined. She seemed so excited about how generous you were being. I felt sick to my stomach as the full scope of Sylwen's deception became clear. She hadn't just been planning to manipulate me into paying for her wedding. She'd been planning it for months, setting up the wedding planning company to believe I was already committed to covering all costs. She'd essentially been planning a $45,000 wedding on the assumption that she could guilt or manipulate me into paying for it when the bills came due. "What kind of payment issues are you having?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. Well, her credit card was declined for the final payment of $8,000 that was due last Friday. When we called her about it, she said there must be some mistake and to try again Monday. We tried again this morning and it was declined again. So that's when she told us to call you. She said you'd handle it immediately. Her card was declined for $8,000? I repeated slowly. Yes, and that's just the final payment. We've been having issues with smaller payments over the past month as well. The florist deposit, the final catering payment, even the transportation costs. She keeps saying you'll take care of everything, but we need actual payment, not promises. I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was hearing. Sylwen's wedding was falling apart, not because I'd refused to pay for it, but because she'd never had the money to pay for it herself. She'd been planning a $45,000 wedding with no way to actually afford it, counting on her ability to manipulate me into covering the costs when the bills came due. "Rowena," I said carefully, "I want to be very clear about this. I am not paying for Sylwen's wedding. I never agreed to pay for her wedding. She does not have permission to use my name as a financial contact, and any arrangements she made with you based on promises of my payment were made without my knowledge or consent." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long. Thought the call had dropped. When Rowena finally spoke, her voice was small and defeated. "Oh no. Oh no, this is a disaster. We've already ordered everything, booked everything, confirmed everything based on her assurances that payment was guaranteed. The wedding is in 2 weeks. What are we supposed to do now?" "I'm sorry you're in this position," I said, and I genuinely was. "But you'll need to work that out with Sylwen directly. She's the one who made commitments she couldn't keep." After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline, trying to absorb the full magnitude of what I'd just learned. Sylwen hadn't just asked me for $45,000 on a whim. She'd been planning to extort that money from me for months, setting up elaborate schemes to make it impossible for me to say no. She'd essentially been planning a wedding she couldn't afford while counting on her ability to manipulate me into paying for it. But more than that, she'd been lying to everyone about the situation. The wedding planner thought I was secretly funding everything as a generous surprise. My family thought I was selfishly refusing to help with reasonable wedding costs. The truth was that there were no reasonable wedding costs because Sylwen had planned an unreasonable wedding with no way to pay for it. I called Yorvin immediately and filled him in on this new development. His response was both professional and personal outrage. "This is fraud," he said bluntly. "She misrepresented her ability to pay for services, used your name without permission as a financial guarantor, and attempted to coerce you into paying for commitments she made fraudulently. This goes way beyond family financial manipulation into potential criminal behavior." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. Get a written statement from the wedding planner about what Sylwen told them and when. Save all the text messages and social media posts. And under no circumstances should you pay any of those bills, no matter how much pressure you receive. Paying now would be rewarding fraud and would make you an accomplice to her deception." That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I made my own Facebook post, carefully crafted to tell my side of the story without getting into ugly details or personal attacks. I've seen some posts this weekend about family obligations and wedding support, and I want to address them briefly. Setting financial boundaries isn't about money being more important than family. It's about not enabling destructive patterns that hurt everyone involved. Love cannot be purchased, and family relationships that require financial transactions to maintain aren't actually loving relationships. I wish everyone happiness and healing, but I will no longer be participating in dynamics that mistake manipulation for affection. The response was immediate and polarizing. Sylwen's supporters doubled down on their attacks. but something unexpected happened too. I started hearing from people who understood exactly what I was going through. Old college friends reached out privately to share their own stories of family financial manipulation. Former colleagues sent messages of support, talking about their experiences with relatives who treated success as a family asset rather than a personal achievement. Even strangers who'd seen the drama unfolding online sent friend requests and messages of solidarity. "I went through something similar with my brother," wrote someone I barely knew from high school. It took me years to realize that enabling his irresponsibility wasn't helping him or protecting our relationship. Setting boundaries was the hardest and best thing I ever did. "Family financial manipulation is abuse," wrote a woman whose story was heartbreakingly similar to mine. "Just because it comes with guilt trips and claims of love doesn't make it any less destructive. You're doing the right thing." The validation from these unexpected sources was overwhelming. For years, I'd been made to feel like my reluctance to hand over money on demand was a character flaw, a sign of selfishness or lost priorities. But hearing from others who'd been through similar experiences helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't unique, and my response wasn't unreasonable. By the end of the week, two things had become clear. Sylwen's social media campaign was losing momentum as people got bored with the drama, and her wedding plans were falling apart as vendors demanded actual payment instead of promises. The truth was starting to leak out through the cracks in her story, and the people who mattered most were beginning to see the situation more clearly. I felt calmer than I had in years, surrounded by the chaos of my family's disappointment, but anchored by the knowledge that I was finally protecting myself from a dynamic that had been destroying me slowly for decades. The external validation was nice, but the internal peace was everything. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Millhaven, across from a young woman named Andrea Corville, who reminded me so much of my younger self that it was almost painful to watch her struggle with the same questions I'd wrestled with for years. She was 26, brilliant, and had just landed her first major promotion at a tech startup. But instead of celebrating her success, she was agonizing over her family's expectations that she use her newfound financial stability to solve everyone else's problems. "I know I should be happy," Andrea said, stirring her latte with nervous energy that radiated across the small table between us. "This promotion is everything I've worked toward since college. But the first thing my mom said when I told her about the salary increase was that now I could help my brother get out of debt. Not congratulations, not how proud she was, just immediately how my success could benefit someone else." I nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern that had taken me decades to identify in my own family. "How much debt are we talking about?" $38,000. Credit cards, a car loan he can't afford, some personal loans he took out for what he called investment opportunities that never panned out. "My mom acts like it's my responsibility to fix it because I'm doing well, now." She made air quotes around the phrase, her frustration evident in every gesture. This had become my new normal over the past few months. Word had spread through my professional network about my experience with family financial manipulation, partly through my own openness about the situation and partly through the inevitable gossip that follows any dramatic family conflict. What surprised me was how many people reached out privately, sharing their own stories of relatives who treated their success as a family resource and their boundaries as acts of selfishness. It started with a former client who asked if we could grab coffee to discuss not her business finances, but her personal ones. She'd built a successful consulting practice only to find herself constantly pressured to fund her parents' early retirement, her sister's master's degree, and her brother's various business ventures. She'd been living with the guilt and stress for years, never realizing that other people faced similar challenges. That conversation led to another, then another, until I found myself inadvertently becoming a mentor for successful women who were struggling to maintain their financial boundaries against family pressure. It wasn't something I'd planned or advertised, but it was work that felt more meaningful than any business consultation I'd ever done. The thing that makes it so hard, Andrea continued, is that they're not wrong about me having more money now. I do. But they act like that money isn't mine, like it's a family resource that I'm being selfish with if I don't share it. How do you tell people you love that their financial problems aren't your responsibility? You start by understanding that love doesn't come with a price tag, I told her, repeating words that had taken me years to internalize. Real family support means celebrating your success, not immediately calculating how they can benefit from it. When people's first response to your achievements is figuring out what you can do for them, that's not love. That's opportunism. I'd been having variations of this conversation for months now, and each time I was struck by how similar the patterns were across different families, different backgrounds, different circumstances. The details changed, but the emotional manipulation techniques were remarkably consistent. Guilt, obligation, family loyalty, and the weaponization of love as a tool for financial control. What had started as informal coffee meetings with friends and colleagues had gradually evolved into something more structured. I'd begun hosting monthly workshops for women dealing with family financial manipulation, partnering with a local therapist named Camille Drovan, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. Our sessions combined practical financial advice with emotional support, helping participants understand both the psychological patterns they were dealing with and the concrete steps they could take to protect themselves. The workshops filled up immediately every month, with waiting lists that stretched for weeks. I'd had no idea how many people were struggling with these issues in silence, feeling isolated and guilty for wanting to protect their financial security from family members who saw their success as community property. The hardest part for me was realizing that I'd been trained from childhood to associate my value with what I could provide, I shared with the group during one particularly intense session. Every time I achieved something, the focus immediately shifted to how that achievement could benefit others. I never learned to celebrate my own success because I was too busy figuring out how to distribute it. Nadia Crestwell, a marketing executive whose parents expected her to fund their vacation home purchase, raised her hand. But how do you get past the guilt? Even when I know logically that their financial problems aren't my fault, I still feel terrible saying no. The guilt is the hardest part, I acknowledged, because it's been programmed into us over decades. They've trained us to believe that saying no to financial demands means we don't love them. But here's what I've learned. People who truly love, you don't make their love conditional on your willingness to bankrupt yourself for their benefit. These workshops had become the most fulfilling part of my professional life, more meaningful than any business success I'd achieved. Watching women find the courage to set boundaries, protect their financial futures, and reclaim their right to enjoy their own success without guilt was incredibly rewarding in ways that traditional consulting work had never been. But the workshops were just one part of how my life had transformed since I'd walked away from my family's financial manipulation. The mental and emotional energy I'd previously spent on managing their demands and expectations had been freed up for pursuits that actually brought me joy and fulfillment. I'd started traveling again, not just for work, but for pleasure. The European vacation I'd been saving for became a reality, but instead of the rushed 2-week trip I'd originally planned, I took a month off and explored at a pace that allowed me to actually experience the places I was visiting rather than just checking them off a list. In Prague, I spent 3 days in art museums, remembering my childhood love of painting that I'd abandoned somewhere between building my business and managing family crises. In Barcelona, I took a cooking class and discovered that I had a natural talent for Spanish cuisine. In Amsterdam, I rented a bike and spent hours cycling through the city, feeling a freedom and lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Each destination taught me something new about myself, interests and passions that had been buried under years of stress and obligation. I started keeping a travel journal, not just documenting where I went, but how each experience was changing my understanding of who I was when I wasn't constantly responding to other people's financial emergencies. When I returned to Millhaven, I continued exploring these rediscovered parts of myself. I enrolled in evening art classes at the community college, something I would have considered a frivolous waste of time just a year earlier. I joined a hiking group that met every weekend for trail walks in the mountains surrounding the city. I started attending community theater productions, book club meetings, and wine tastings, slowly building a social life that existed entirely separate from work and family obligations. The most surprising development was a romantic relationship that emerged naturally from this new social engagement. Travis Derrick was a fellow hiker from the weekend group, a high school English teacher who shared my love of literature and outdoor adventures, but had absolutely no interest in my financial success beyond being happy that I was happy. Our relationship developed slowly and organically, built on shared interests and genuine compatibility, rather than the financial dynamics that had colored so many of my previous relationships. He didn't know or care how much money I made, never asked me to pay for expensive dates, and seemed genuinely puzzled when I offered to cover costs that were clearly beyond his teacher's salary. "I asked you out," he said when I tried to pay for dinner on our third date. "That means I'm paying. Besides, I chose this restaurant specifically because I could afford it. If I wanted to go somewhere more expensive, I'd save up for it first." His approach to money was so refreshingly different from what I'd experienced with my family that it took me months to trust that he wasn't playing some kind of long game, waiting for the right moment to reveal his own financial expectations. But as our relationship deepened, I realized he was exactly who he appeared to be, someone who valued experiences over possessions, relationships over transactions, and emotional connection over financial benefit. Being with Travis helped me understand what healthy financial boundaries looked like in practice. He had his own money, managed his own expenses, and never expected me to subsidize his lifestyle or solve his financial problems. When his car needed major repairs that strained his budget, he took on extra tutoring work to cover the cost rather than asking me for help. When I offered to contribute anyway, he thanked me but declined, explaining that he preferred to handle his own financial responsibilities. "It's not about pride," he explained. "It's about maintaining balance in our relationship. If you start solving my financial problems, it changes the dynamic between us. I want us to be equals, not creditor and debtor." His perspective was so different from my family's approach that it initially felt foreign. But gradually I began to understand how much healthier this approach was for both of us. Our relationship was based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection, rather than financial interdependence or obligation. Meanwhile, my business was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. Without the constant stress and distraction of family financial drama, I was able to focus more completely on my work, taking on larger clients and more complex projects. My reputation in the financial consulting industry had grown to the point where I was being invited to speak at conferences and contribute to professional publications. But more importantly, I was enjoying my work again. For years, business success had felt like a burden because it made me a target for financial exploitation. Now it felt like what it should have always been, the natural result of hard work, expertise, and dedication. I'd also started a small foundation, focused on financial literacy education for young women, particularly those from low-income backgrounds who might be vulnerable to family financial manipulation as they achieved success. The foundation offered scholarships for financial education programs, workshops on boundary setting and family dynamics, and mentorship opportunities that connected successful women with those just starting their careers. The work was deeply personal, for me, representing the resources I wished I'd had when I was first navigating the complex intersection of family loyalty and financial independence. Every young woman we helped felt like a small victory against the cycle of manipulation and guilt that had nearly destroyed my own relationship with success. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I received an unexpected call from Rowena Thalric, the wedding planner who'd been caught in the middle of Sylwen's fraudulent schemes. She was calling not about any remaining payment issues, but to tell me what had eventually happened with the wedding situation. "I thought you might want to know," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal vindication. After everything fell apart with the original wedding plans, Sylwen and Leander did end up getting married. But they had a small ceremony at the courthouse with a reception at her parents' house. It was lovely, actually, much more intimate and meaningful than the elaborate event she'd originally planned. I felt a complex mixture of emotions hearing this news. Relief that Sylwen had found a way to marry the person she loved without bankrupting herself or manipulating me. Sadness that our relationship had been so damaged by the financial conflict, and a strange kind of pride that she'd ultimately found a solution that didn't require anyone else's financial sacrifice. She seemed genuinely happy, Rowena continued. And Leander looked relieved, honestly. I got the impression that the pressure of planning such an expensive wedding had been stressing their relationship more than either of them wanted to admit. The simple ceremony was much more in line with who they actually are as people. After hanging up, I sat in my office thinking about how different things might have been if Sylwen had approached me from the beginning with honesty instead of manipulation. If she'd asked for help planning a wedding she could afford, rather than demanding I pay for one she couldn't. If she'd seen my success as something to celebrate rather than something to exploit. But I also realized that dwelling on alternative scenarios was pointless. The conflict had revealed fundamental differences in how we viewed family relationships, financial responsibility, and personal boundaries. Even if the wedding situation had been handled differently, these underlying issues would have surfaced, eventually in some other form. What mattered now was that I'd finally learned to protect myself from those toxic dynamics, and in doing so, I'd discovered parts of myself that had been buried for years under the stress of managing other people's financial expectations. I was healthier, happier, and more fulfilled than I'd been in decades, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate, but it had been worth every difficult conversation, every guilt trip resisted, every boundary maintained. I'd finally learned that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And that lesson had opened up possibilities for growth, connection, and joy that I'd never imagined when I was trapped in the cycle of enabling other people's financial irresponsibility. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free. 2 years have passed since that devastating text message about the $45,000 wedding demand arrived in my office. And as I sit here today writing this story, I'm struck by how completely my life has transformed. Not just the external circumstances, though those have changed dramatically, but the internal landscape of who I am and how I move through the world. This morning, I woke up in my downtown loft apartment next to Travis, who was already awake reading the newspaper and drinking the coffee he'd made for both of us. We discussed our plans for the weekend, a hiking trip to the state park, followed by dinner at a new restaurant that we'd both been wanting to try and that we'd both budgeted for separately. Simple pleasures that would have been impossible for me to enjoy 2 years ago, when every moment of happiness was overshadowed by anxiety about the next financial crisis I'd be expected to solve. My business is more successful than ever, but success feels completely different now. Instead of being a target painted on my back that made me vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation, my achievements feel like what they should have always been: evidence of hard work, strategic thinking, and the courage to pursue challenging goals. I make decisions based on what's best for my business and my clients, not based on how much money I need to keep available for family emergencies that aren't actually emergencies. The foundation I started has grown beyond anything I initially imagined. We now offer programs in 6 different cities, helping hundreds of young women each year develop both financial literacy and the emotional intelligence to maintain healthy boundaries with family members who might try to exploit their success. The work is deeply meaningful in ways that traditional consulting never was, because I know from personal experience how life-changing it can be to finally understand that your worth isn't measured by what you can provide for others. Last month, I had the profound experience of watching Maris Elthorn, one of our first scholarship recipients, graduate with her business degree debt-free because she'd learned to protect herself from family members who wanted to borrow her tuition money for their own priorities. She sent me a photo from her graduation ceremony with a note that said, "Thank you for teaching me that saying no to them meant saying yes to myself." That photo is framed on my desk now, a reminder of why this work matters so much. But perhaps, the most significant change in my life has been learning what healthy family relationships actually look like. Through Travis, I've been welcomed into a family dynamic that was completely foreign to me at first. Unconditional love, genuine support, and celebration of each other's achievements without immediately calculating how those achievements can be leveraged for personal benefit. When Travis got promoted to department head at his school last year, his parents threw a surprise celebration dinner where the entire conversation focused on how proud they were of him and how much he deserved. The recognition. Nobody mentioned how his increased salary could help with his brother's student loans or his sister's down payment fund. They just celebrated his success as his success, period. I cried in the restaurant bathroom afterward, not from sadness, but from finally experiencing what family support was supposed to feel like. His family's approach to money is equally revolutionary to me. When his sister needed help with unexpected medical bills, the family discussed it openly. Everyone contributed what they could afford without resentment or obligation, and nobody was made to feel guilty for the amount they were able or unable to give. When Travis's brother decided to start his own landscaping business, they offered encouragement and practical advice, but nobody expected anyone else to fund his startup costs. Everyone was responsible for their own financial decisions, and everyone was supported emotionally regardless of their economic circumstances. This is how families are supposed to work, Travis explained when I marveled at their functional dynamics. Love isn't transactional. Support isn't contingent on payment. Everyone contributes what they can when they can, but nobody's worth is measured by their bank account. It took me months to trust that this wasn't an elaborate performance designed to impress me before revealing their true expectations. But gradually, I began to understand that this was simply how healthy families operated, with genuine care for each other's well-being, rather than opportunistic exploitation of each other's resources. My relationship with my own family has stabilized into something I never thought possible: peaceful distance. We exchange holiday cards and birthday wishes, but the constant drama and financial demands have ended completely. Sylwen and I don't have regular contact, but the few interactions we've had have been civil and brief. She seems to have learned to live within her means, and I've learned to protect my peace from people who mistake my boundaries for betrayal. My parents and I talk occasionally, usually initiated by them when they want to share family news or photos. The conversations are cordial but surface level, carefully avoiding any topics that might lead to requests for financial assistance. I can hear the sadness in their voices sometimes, a kind of bewilderment at how we got to this place, but I no longer feel responsible for managing their emotions or fixing relationships that were damaged by their own choices. The most unexpected development has been occasional messages from extended family members who've begun to understand the real dynamics that led to our estrangement. My cousin Kyla reached out last year after her own daughter started earning good money and immediately became the family's go-to source for financial solutions to everyone else's problems. "I never understood what you went through until it was happening to my daughter," she wrote. "I'm sorry we didn't see how unfair the expectations were. I'm sorry we made you feel like the villain for protecting yourself. You were right to set boundaries, and I wish we'd supported you instead of pressuring you. These acknowledgments don't change the past, but they do provide a kind of validation that helps heal some of the wounds left by years of being misunderstood and villainized for refusing to enable dysfunction. More importantly, They give me hope that other families might learn from our experience and handle similar situations with more wisdom and compassion. The most significant lesson I've learned through all of this is that real love doesn't come with price tags, payment plans, or conditional terms. People who genuinely care about your well-being want you to succeed for your own benefit, not for what your success can do for them. They celebrate your achievements without immediately calculating their own potential gain. They offer support during difficult times without keeping score or demanding repayment in the form of future financial assistance. Family financial manipulation is one of the most insidious forms of emotional abuse because it's disguised as love and concern. The manipulators genuinely believe they're entitled to access your resources because of genetic relationships or shared history. They frame their demands as family loyalty and paint your refusal as selfishness or betrayal. But underneath all the emotional rhetoric, they're simply people who've chosen to make their financial problems your responsibility rather than developing their own solutions. The guilt is the hardest part to overcome because it's been programmed into you over years or decades of conditioning. You've been trained to believe that saying no to financial demands means you don't care about family, that success creates obligation, and that love requires financial sacrifice. But none of that is true. Love requires emotional investment, time, attention, and care. It doesn't require bankrupting yourself to fund other people's poor decisions or unrealistic lifestyle expectations. Setting financial boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you responsible. It protects not only your own financial security, but also prevents you from enabling behavior that ultimately harms the people you're trying to help. When you constantly rescue people from the consequences of their financial choices, you rob them of the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and develop better money management skills. I think about this often when I remember all the times I helped Sylwen with her financial crises. I wasn't actually helping her. I was teaching her that manipulation was more effective than budgeting, that emotional blackmail could solve money problems, and that other people would always be available to clean up her messes. My enabling behavior made it possible for her to avoid learning financial responsibility for years longer than she would have otherwise. If you're reading this story and recognizing your own family dynamics in it, I want you to know that you're not alone. You're not crazy, and you're not selfish for wanting to protect your financial security. Financial manipulation is real, it's destructive, and it's surprisingly common, especially in families where one person achieves significantly more economic success than others. Here's what I wish someone had told me years ago. Your success belongs to you. You earned it through your hard work, your sacrifices, your strategic decisions, and your willingness to take risks that others weren't willing to take. You don't owe anyone access to the fruits of that labor simply because you share DNA or grew up in the same house. It's okay to say no to financial demands, even from people you love. It's okay to require family members to solve their own money problems instead of expecting you to solve them. It's okay to enjoy your success without guilt, to spend your money on your own priorities, and to plan for your own future without factoring in everyone else's potential needs. Most importantly, it's okay to walk away from relationships that are only maintained through financial transactions. Real family relationships survive the establishment of healthy boundaries. Relationships that can't survive those boundaries weren't actually healthy relationships in the first place. The process of setting these boundaries will be difficult. You'll face guilt trips, emotional manipulation, public pressure, and accusations of selfishness or betrayal. Some family members will cut off contact rather than accept your new terms. Extended family and friends who don't understand the full situation will judge you based on incomplete information. But here's what will happen if you stay strong. You'll discover who actually loves you versus who was just using you. You'll find peace in relationships that aren't based on financial transactions. You'll be able to enjoy your success without constantly worrying about who's going to try to claim a piece of it. You'll have the mental and emotional energy to pursue goals and interests that actually matter to you. You'll also discover, as I did, that there are many other people struggling with similar issues who will understand and support your decision to protect yourself. The validation and community you thought you could only find within your family is actually available from people who share your experiences and values, regardless of genetic relationships. 2 years ago, I thought choosing my financial security over my family's expectations would leave me isolated and alone. Instead, it opened up space in my life for healthier relationships, more meaningful work, and a level of personal fulfillment I'd never experienced when I was constantly managing other people's financial crises. I still love my family, but I love them from a safe distance that protects both my resources and my peace of mind. I wish them happiness and healing, but I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my own well-being to enable their dysfunction. I hope they eventually learn to build healthier relationships with each other and with money, but their growth is their responsibility, not mine. If you're facing similar challenges, please remember that you deserve relationships based on love rather than financial utility. You deserve to enjoy the success you've worked so hard to achieve. You deserve family members who celebrate your achievements rather than immediately calculating how those achievements can benefit them. Setting boundaries isn't about being mean or selfish. It's about creating space for authentic love to flourish and protecting yourself from people who mistake manipulation for affection. It's about choosing self-respect over people-pleasing and financial security over emotional blackmail. Your money is not a family asset. Your success is not community property. Your love cannot be purchased, and your worth is not determined by what you can provide for others. Choose yourself. Protect your peace. Set your boundaries and hold them firmly, no matter how much pressure you receive to abandon them. You deserve a life where your value isn't measured by the size of your bank account or your willingness to empty it for other people's benefit. The most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the people trying to exploit you, is to stop enabling financial irresponsibility and start modeling what healthy boundaries look like in practice. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And it's the foundation for building relationships based on genuine care rather than financial convenience. You are worth more than what you can provide. You deserve better than transactional love. And you have every right to protect the life you've built, even from people who share your last name. Trust me on this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And it's the best gift you can give to everyone involved, including the people you're refusing to enable. The wedding demand was never really about $45,000. It was about whether I was finally ready to value myself enough to say no to people who only valued what I could give them. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to choose myself. Now it's your turn. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.